I stood inside the courthouse restroom, straightening my jacket for the 10th time. The raised scars across my back stretched with every motion, a permanent reminder of that terrible night 3 years earlier. My attorney, Ms. Bennett, had already warned me that both of them would be present today. My mother and Marcus, my stepfather, the ideal couple in our quiet town, respected youth leaders at First Baptist Church. If only their church family could have heard my little sister's cries that night. The memory hit me like a crashing wave. Sarah, just 11 years old then, shrinking back in fear as Marcus loomed over her. Belt raised because she had forgotten to address him as sir. I had stepped in front of her that day, something I had never done before. "Don't touch her," I had said, my voice trembling yet firm. "She's only a child." The following seconds unfolded in slow motion in my recurring nightmares, Marcus's expression twisted with fury. My mother appeared at the doorway, her eyes icy and detached. "Julia needs another lesson in obedience, doesn't she, honey?" she had remarked, as casually as if commenting on the weather. I reached up and touched the back of my neck, feeling the thick scar tissue beneath my shirt. The iron poker from our fireplace set had still carried our family surname, Bennett. The bitter irony was not lost on me that it now shared a name with my lawyer. A gentle knock broke my thoughts. "Julia?" Sarah's voice came softly through the door. "The bailiff says it's time." I opened the restroom door. Sarah, now 14, stood there wearing the nicest dress we had picked out together after I gained custody. The shadows beneath her eyes showed she hadn't slept much either. "You don't have to go through this," I told her, adjusting her collar gently. "You can stay outside if you want." She lifted her chin, looking far more mature than her 14 years. "I'm not leaving you alone with them ever again." As we entered the courtroom, I immediately felt their stares. My mother sat dressed in her finest church clothes, gripping her Bible like armor. Marcus wore an expression of holy outrage. Their supporters occupied 2 full rows, churchgoers who had written letters praising their strict but caring approach to parenting. Our side had fewer people, but they were far more solid. Ms. Bennett, who had accepted my case without charge after examining my scars. Detective Rivera, who had taken photographs of the burns and heard Sarah's account with moisture in his eyes. Dr. Chen, who had recorded years of questionable injuries that our family physician had overlooked. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Martinez walked in, her expression impossible to read. She had spent the previous 3 days examining every piece of evidence. Images, hospital files, Sarah's personal journal, and the recording that had altered everything. My mother had always filmed their so-called correction sessions, claiming it proved they were carrying out God's will. On the night of the branding, she had placed her phone on the mantel, capturing the entire horror in sharp detail. "Before we continue," Judge Martinez stated, "I need to mention something that was added to evidence this morning." She held up a familiar leather journal. "Mrs. Harrison, do you recognize this diary?" My mother's face lost all color. It was her personal journal, the one she had always kept locked in her nightstand drawer. The one in which she had described every punishment with chilling satisfaction. "Objection, Your Honor," their attorney rose. "That journal was acquired through illegal means." Overruled, Judge Martinez interrupted firmly. "The diary was recovered during a lawful search of the Harrison home, permitted after Ms. Harrison's younger sister disclosed further mistreatment." The entire room grew quiet as the judge began reading an entry aloud. "Julia's rebellious attitude demanded firmer action today. The Lord directed Marcus's hand as we applied the brand to her skin." Her cries were prayers for deliverance. A gasp escaped from someone in the church group. I felt Sarah's fingers slide into mine and squeeze hard. "Mrs. Harrison," the judge went on, "you recorded this the night you restrained your 15-year-old daughter, while your husband pressed a glowing metal rod against her back. You described her skin sizzling as if Satan were departing her body. My mother's expression turned rigid. We were rescuing her soul by searing your family name into her skin." She needed to understand who she belonged to. Marcus broke in, his tone full of self-righteousness. "Everything we did came from love." Judge Martinez's stare could have turned fire to ice. "Mr. Harrison, I advise you to stay quiet. I am not finished." She flipped to another page in the diary. "There are 3 full years of entries here. 3 years of carefully recorded torment presented as correction. 3 years of proof that you and your wife deliberately harmed 2 children while your community looked the other way. The church supporters shifted uneasily in their seats. Some were truly seeing us for the first time. Your Honor, Ms. Bennett stood. The prosecution requests to show the video from the night in question. I shut my eyes. I didn't need to watch it again. I still experienced it every night in my dreams. But the others needed to witness it. They needed to hear my screams, see my mother's calm smile, and watch Marcus's satisfied expression as he pressed the heated metal into my flesh. The projector started, and my 15-year-old voice echoed through the silent courtroom. Please, Mom, please don't let him. The footage played with brutal clarity on the large screen. Every cry, every desperate plea, every horrifying sizzle of burning skin filled the room. The camera captured it all. My mother's peaceful smile as she held my arms down, Marcus's face twisted in holy triumph, and Sarah's tiny figure huddled in the corner with her hands covering her ears. Increase the volume, Judge Martinez ordered when Marcus's voice rang out. This is what happens when you question my authority in my Christian home. Several church members stood and walked out, unable to continue watching. Mrs. Peterson, who had submitted a strong character letter for my parents, became ill into her handbag. The most disturbing part wasn't even the physical pain. It was the prayers they offered while committing the act. My mother's steady, composed voice. Lord, we thank you for granting us the power to discipline our disobedient daughter. When the video showed Marcus heating the rod again for a second burn, Judge Martinez lifted her hand. That is sufficient. Her voice carried a slight tremor. Bailiff, lights please. The overhead lights came back on, exposing tears on many jurors' faces. One older gentleman wept openly. Detective Rivera took the witness stand next. We discovered similar tools in the Harrison home during our search, he stated, setting evidence bags on the table. All showed signs of repeated use. All carried different family-themed phrases intended to be burned into skin. He displayed each bag one by one, property of father, God's faithful daughter, obedient wife. These were prepared for future use, he added. According to the diary, they had intentions for young Sarah on her 13th birthday. Sarah tensed beside me. That birthday was approaching next month. My mother rose abruptly. We are their parents. We have every right. Sit down, Mrs. Harrison, Judge Martinez commanded. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly recommend you use it before you damage your case any further. Marcus's attorney, now visibly perspiring, tried to recover. Your Honor, although my client's methods may appear harsh to outsiders, they were following their deeply held religious convictions. Objection. Ms. Bennett's voice cut sharply. Religious liberty does not permit the torture of children. Sustained, Judge Martinez ruled, and counsel, I suggest you reconsider your approach. This court will not accept faith-based excuses for child abuse. The following hour featured testimony from medical professionals. They presented x-rays of healed breaks, images of repeated belt welts, and records of injuries that had been dismissed as accidents. Dr. Chen's words were especially powerful. The scarring on Julia's back is lifelong, he explained. The tissue damage runs deep, and the emotional trauma, he paused to steady himself. In 15 years of emergency medicine, I have never encountered such deliberate and methodical cruelty. During a short break, Sarah tugged at my sleeve. Look, she whispered. Our former pastor was speaking with my mother, his face pale. She reached for him, but he pulled away, shaking his head slowly. One after another, the church members who had arrived to support them quietly moved to other seats, leaving my parents sitting alone. When the session resumed, Ms. Bennett called me to testify. I walked past my parents, sensing Marcus's burning gaze on my back fitting under the circumstances. Julia, Ms. Bennett asked kindly, can you describe to the court what occurred after the night of the branding? I drew in a deep breath. I couldn't attend school for weeks. The wounds became infected. My mother claimed it was God's method of removing my demons. My voice grew steadier, but she made an error. She sent me back to school too early before the bandages were gone. My physical education teacher noticed them during class. And then what happened? She contacted Child Protective Services, but my parents held high standing in the community. They persuaded everyone that I was a difficult child inventing tales. I looked straight at my mother until Sarah fell ill. The courtroom grew tense. This was the moment that had finally shattered their flawless image. They refused to take her to the hospital, I continued. They insisted prayer alone would cure her appendicitis. I waited until they left for church, took their spare car keys, and drove her to the emergency room myself. She was minutes away from her appendix bursting. You were only 16. Bennett confirmed. No driver's license, no approval. You risked everything to protect your sister. They would have allowed her to die, I said, my voice cracking for the first time. Just as they would have eventually killed me, all in the name of correction. I turned to the jury and to the church members who had supported my parents for years. The brand on my back reads, "Honor thy father." But true honor and true faith are not built on control or suffering. They are built on love, and there was never any love in that house. Only dominance masked as holiness. Marcus leaped to his feet, his chair scraping loudly. "You ungrateful, Mr. Harrison." Judge Martinez's gavel struck firmly. "One more outburst, and you will be escorted from this courtroom. Although, considering the evidence presented, that may be the smallest of your problems." The judge's eyes met mine, and I saw understanding there. Not sympathy, but recognition. She had seen past their pious disguise to the darkness beneath. "Court will take a 1-hour recess," she declared. "When we return, I will deliver my ruling." As the bailiff escorted my parents out, my mother glanced back at me one final time. The mask of motherly care had finally slipped, exposing the cold emptiness that had always been there. I did not look away. I was no longer their victim. The scars on my back were no longer signs of shame. They were proof of my survival. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. My parents sat rigidly upright, still clinging to their sense of righteousness. But the now empty rows behind them told the real story. Their supporters had all left, leaving only their attorney, who appeared ready to flee as well. Judge Martinez wasted no time on formalities. "In my 20 years as a judge," she began, "I have handled many child abuse cases. I have seen parents harm their children because of rage, addiction, or psychological issues. But what this courtroom has revealed is entirely different. Organized, intentional torment justified by a twisted version of religion." She raised my mother's diary. "This record describes 3 years of planned mistreatment. Mrs. Harrison, you wrote about choosing tools, scheduling sessions, and deciding which areas of your children's bodies would best conceal the evidence. You described your daughter's suffering with what can only be called pleasure. My mother's face stayed hard, but her hands shook. Mr. Harrison," the judge continued, "you branded a 15-year-old girl as if she were livestock. You permanently marked her body to declare your ownership. This court completely rejects any claim that these acts are protected by parental authority or religious freedom." The judge paused and removed her glasses. "Julia Harrison, please stand." I rose on unsteady legs, Sarah's hand still firmly in mine. "This court has found clear and convincing evidence of severe child abuse, torture, unlawful confinement, and conspiracy to cause serious injury. Marcus and Elizabeth Harrison, please rise." They stood, my mother still holding her Bible tightly. "This court sentences each of you to 25 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. You are also permanently prohibited from any form of contact with Julia or Sarah Harrison, directly or indirectly." The gavel struck, and something inside me shattered, not from pain, but from freedom. 3 years of constant fear, of constantly watching my back, of nightmares about them finding us, ended with that sound. Marcus lunged forward. "You cannot do this. They are our children." "Not anymore," Judge Martinez replied as bailiffs moved in to restrain him. "They stopped being your children the moment you chose brutality instead of love. Take them away." As they were led out, my mother finally broke. "Julia, tell them we did it for you. Tell them we loved you." I looked at her, really looked for the very last time. "Love doesn't leave scars, Mom." The bailiffs guided them out, my mother's cries ringing through the hall, the same cries she had once faked to convince neighbors we were a perfect family. Outside the courthouse, reporters stood waiting with cameras rolling. Ms. Bennett guided us through the crowd, but I stopped at the top of the stairs. Sarah squeezed my hand, knowing exactly what I needed to say. "Yes, I will make a statement," I told the reporters, "but not about the sentence. I want to speak to every child still living in homes like mine, children whose parents use religion to excuse abuse." The cameras focused as I spoke. "You are not alone. What they are doing is not love, not discipline, and not God's plan. There are people ready to help you. There are people who will believe you. You do not have to carry those scars by yourself. That evening, Sarah and I sat together in our modest apartment, the one I had rented with my earnings as a youth counselor after winning custody of her. The phone rang constantly with calls from support organizations and fellow survivors who had seen the news. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, curled up on our worn sofa. I touched the back of my neck, feeling the scars that no longer controlled me. We heal, we help others heal, and we live truly live without fear. A week later, I received a package from the courthouse. Inside was my mother's diary, now officially evidence, along with a short note from Judge Martinez. "Your testimony will help reform laws. Your bravery will help save lives." I placed the diary on a shelf, not hidden but kept as a reminder, not of the suffering but of endurance, of change, and of justice. The brand on my back had been intended to mark me as their possession forever. Instead, it became a symbol of everything I had conquered. Each scar now told a different story, not of their brutality, but of my resilience. Sarah began high school that autumn, no longer the frightened little girl cowering in corners. I returned to college, pursuing a degree in social work. The nightmares never vanished entirely, but they transformed. In them, I was no longer the victim. I was the guardian, standing between darkness and the children who needed protection. Sometimes, late at night, I still run my fingers over the raised letters on my back. But they no longer spell "Honor thy father." To me, they now spell "Survivor." And that is the name I choose to carry.